If only you'd protected Janet with such ferocity, Dr. Pym.
Easy, Hank.
You mention my wife again, and I'll show you ferocity.
Michael Douglas. The name itself just sounds like Hollywood power. He's the titan of the silver screen who carried one of the most legendary names in movie history and somehow carved out an identity all his own. He's the son of a legend, a two-time Oscar winner, and one of the most respected actors in the business. For decades, Michael Douglas was the man who had it all. He was Gordon Gekko, the brutal corporate raider who defined an entire era of ambition. He was the hero, the flawed good guy, the magnetic leading man who could own the screen with a single, intense look. His life looked like a masterclass in success, a highlight reel of blockbuster movies, rave reviews, and red carpet victories. He built an empire, won the awards, and lived a life most of us could only dream of. Hollywood icon Michael Douglas. He truly seemed to have it all. A legendary last name, 2 Academy Awards, and a run of hit films that shaped a generation. But behind that dazzling success and charismatic smile, a completely different story was unfolding. A story of private heartbreak, a devastating health crisis, and personal struggles that would eventually lead him away from the spotlight and into a quiet, secluded new life. This is the story of what really happened to Michael Douglas, a journey through the shadows that were always lurking just behind the blinding lights of fame, and how the man who once ruled the world found himself looking for a way to escape it. It's a story far more somber and far more tragic than his movie roles would ever let on. To really understand the cracks that would later shake the foundation of Michael Douglas's seemingly perfect life, you have to go back to the very beginning, to the huge and often suffocating shadow cast by his father. Kirk Douglas wasn't just an actor. He was a force of nature, a self-made giant from the era of old Hollywood, with that chiseled jaw and an intensity that burned right through the screen. Kirk was Spartacus. He was the champion, a larger-than-life figure who personified a rugged, tough masculinity. Michael himself later described him as incredibly dynamic and aggressive, a man who loved women and put his career before anything else. Born into this world of gods and monsters, Michael's childhood was anything but normal. While his father was out conquering the movie world, Michael and his brother Joel were often on the sidelines. After his parents divorced when he was just 7, Michael's connection to his dad was mostly through holidays and visits to movie sets, glimpses into a world that was both magical and terrifying. He's been honest about this time, admitting his relationship with his father was not particularly good in the beginning. The reason was simple: career definitely went first before family. That emotional distance left a hole, a longing for a fatherly connection that was always second place to stardom. While Kirk Douglas was a father to his sons, he was a film star to the world first. This dynamic planted a seed of struggle that would follow Michael for decades. As he got older and felt the pull of the family business, he wasn't just trying to become an actor. He was trying to become his own man in a world that only saw him as Kirk Douglas's son. It was a constant battle for his own identity. He'd be on set, and seasoned professionals would say, "It's just like your father. Your father does that. It's just really like your father." For a young man trying desperately to carve his own path, these comments were a constant reminder of the long shadow he was trying to escape. He felt this immense pressure to live up to the Douglas name, to prove he wasn't just a product of nepotism, but a real talent in his own right. Even his own father didn't want him to act at first, hoping he'd become a lawyer or something similar. This disapproval, along with the constant comparisons, fueled a quiet but fierce drive in Michael. He knew he had to work harder, be smarter, and pick his projects more carefully than anyone else. The weight of his legacy was a burden, a chip on his shoulder that drove him to incredible success, but it was also the first great tragedy of his life. He was born into royalty but felt like a prince in exile, always fighting to prove he was worthy of a kingdom he never even asked for. This deep-seated struggle for his father's validation would become the first crack in his soul, a vulnerability that would be tested again and again in the turbulent years to come. The stage was set not just for a brilliant career, But for a life of deep internal conflict, Michael Douglas's climb in Hollywood wasn't a flash in the pan. It was a slow, calculated burn. He deliberately chose TV first, a world his famous father had mostly ignored to build his own name. His role as Inspector Steve Keller in the popular 70s cop show, The Streets of San Francisco, made him a household name. For 4 years, people welcomed him into their homes, not as Kirk Douglas's son, but as a familiar TV star. It was his first real taste of independent success, a key step in building the confidence he needed for the film world, but his biggest early win didn't come from acting. It came from producing. He had gotten the rights to the novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest from his father, who'd starred in a play version but could never get a movie made. Michael did what Kirk couldn't. The 1975 film was a cultural phenomenon, sweeping the top 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture for Douglas as producer. It was a massive achievement. He had outmaneuvered the old guard, including his own dad, and proved his instincts were killer. Still, even in that moment of triumph, there was a bittersweet irony. He had won Hollywood's highest honor, but not for his face on the screen. He was still behind the camera, the architect of another actor's legendary performance. The acting breakthrough he desperately wanted finally came with a string of hits. In The China Syndrome, 1979, he held his own against Jane Fonda and Jack Lemmon, proving he had serious dramatic skills. Then came Romancing the Stone, 1984, a fun adventure comedy that made him a true leading man. As the charming rogue Jack T. Colton, he was dashing, funny, and effortlessly cool. He'd finally found a persona that was all his, completely separate from his father's brooding intensity. The movie was a huge success and cemented his status as a bankable star. The absolute peak, the moment that silenced any remaining doubters, was in 1987 with Oliver Stone's Wall Street. His performance as Gordon Gekko was a masterstroke. He wasn't just playing a character. He was capturing the very soul of the 80s. Gekko, with his slicked back hair and his "greed is good" mantra, became an instant cultural icon. It was a role. That could have been a caricature, but Douglas gave him a chilling charisma and a deep, unsettling humanity. That performance earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor, the one prize his father had chased his whole career but never won. On that Oscar night, Michael Douglas wasn't Kirk Douglas's son anymore. He was a king in his own right. After that, he dove into the most successful and controversial part of his career, becoming the master of the erotic thriller with movies like Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct. These films were more than just box office hits. They were cultural lightning rods that tapped into the anxieties of the time. His characters were often flawed, powerful men tempted by forces they couldn't control. This public image, the confident, almost predatory male, was powerful and made him a fortune. He had conquered Hollywood on his own terms. But, as it so often happens, the dazzling light of public success was casting a long, dark shadow over his private life. The very themes he was exploring on screen, addiction, obsession, and the unraveling of a perfect life, were starting to echo in his own reality in ways he could never have imagined, while Michael Douglas was cementing his place as Hollywood royalty. The foundations of his personal life were quietly falling apart. His first marriage to Diandra Luker had all the makings of a fairy tale. They were a glamorous power couple, but behind closed doors, the pressures of his career and the temptations of his lifestyle were taking their toll. The marriage ended in a bitter public divorce, but the real tragedy of this period was what was happening to their son, Cameron, born in 1978, right as Michael's stardom was exploding. Cameron Douglas grew up in a world of both privilege and neglect. He was the grandson of Spartacus and the son of Gordon Gekko, a bloodline that promised everything but offered little in the way of normal parenting. In later interviews, Michael would admit with gut-wrenching honesty that his priorities were all wrong. "My career was first," he stated, a confession heavy with guilt. "My career came before my family." This absence left a void in his son's life, a loneliness that Cameron tried to fill with a deadly mix of drugs and alcohol. The downward spiral started early. As a teen, Cameron began with drinking and marijuana, but it quickly morphed into something much darker. By his early 20s, he was abusing cocaine and heroin. His life became a horrifying cycle of addiction. For Michael, this was a slow-motion nightmare playing out in the tabloids. The father who could control a multi-million-dollar film set was completely powerless to save his own son. He confessed years later, there were moments when hope dwindled. And then it's just a train out of the station. Life became a series of crises. I thought I was going to lose him. The family's attempts to help were desperate and often failed. The pain was unimaginable, a private agony that was the polar opposite of his public persona of power and control. The situation hit a breaking point when Michael, fearing for everyone's safety, made the heartbreaking choice to distance himself. He recalled the awful conversation. That was hard, having to protect myself and my family and tell my older son that, if you feel like I'm pulling away from you, I am. Because I'm afraid you're either going to kill yourself or kill somebody else. It was a devastating admission of defeat, a father's act of tough love. Born from pure terror, the inevitable finally happened in 2009. Cameron was arrested in a de-sting operation and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy to distribute meth and cocaine. The sentence was later extended after he was caught with drugs inside, leading to a horrifying 2 years in solitary confinement. For Michael Douglas, the news was a final, crushing blow. His son, the boy born into Hollywood royalty, was now a federal inmate. The guilt was immense. He blamed himself, his career, and even his genes. He had won the Oscar and conquered the box office, but in the one role that mattered most, being a father, he felt he had failed catastrophically. This family tragedy was a deep, painful wound, a sadness that no amount of fame or money could ever fix, and it was just the start of a decade of personal crises that would bring him to his knees. Just as the emotional storm of his son's imprisonment was raging, a new, more terrifying threat was building inside Michael Douglas's own body. For nearly a year, starting in 2010, he suffered from a sore throat and ear pain. He saw numerous doctors, but they all misdiagnosed it as a simple infection. The pain wouldn't go away, a nagging reminder that something was deeply wrong. The truth was finally discovered in Montreal, Canada, where a doctor found a tumor at the base of his tongue. A biopsy delivered the shocking verdict: stage 4 squamous cell carcinoma. It wasn't just cancer. It was advanced, aggressive, and life-threatening. Stage 4 cancer is not a holiday, Douglas later said with grim understatement. The diagnosis was a thunderclap that shook his entire world. He was given 2 options. The first was a radical surgery to remove parts of his jaw and tongue. It might save his life, but it would almost certainly destroy his voice and his ability to act the very craft that defined him. The second was a brutal, punishing regimen of aggressive chemotherapy and radiation. He chose the latter, a gamble to save the essence of who he was. What followed was a descent into a private hell. The treatments were relentless, wrecking his body. He lost over 30 pounds, his strong frame withering under the chemical assault. The ordeal put an incredible strain on his new family. He had married actress Catherine Zeta-Jones in 2000, and they were raising 2 young children. Zeta-Jones put her career on hold to be by his side, watching the man she loved fight for his life. The stress of it all was immense and contributed to her own public battle with bipolar II disorder, which she was diagnosed with the following year. To make a painful situation even more complicated, Douglas initially told the public he had throat cancer. He only revealed years later that it was actually tongue cancer, a deception his surgeon had advised. The prognosis for tongue cancer was much worse, and the news came right before he had to promote Wall Street. Money never sleeps, they feared. That revealing the whole truth would lead to speculation about disfigurement and death, derailing the film's publicity tour. So he put on a brave face, walking red carpets and giving interviews while enduring a treatment so harsh it felt like torture. He was fighting for his life, his family, and his career all at once under the unblinking eye of the global media. The man who had everything was now facing the terrifying possibility of losing it all. If his journey through this immense struggle from the weight of his family's pain to his own battle for survival, has stirred something inside you. Tap, like, as a small but heartfelt tribute to a resilience that has been tested by the deepest of tragedies. In 2011, Michael Douglas announced he was cancer-free. While the world celebrated a victory for Douglas, it was more like surviving an earthquake that had permanently changed his inner world. It was a rebirth, as he put it, one that completely shifted his priorities. The man who came out of the crucible of cancer was not the same one who went in. The ambition that had driven him for decades was now tempered by a very real sense of his own mortality. This change became clear in his career choices. In interviews around July 2025, Douglas clarified that he considers himself semi-retired. He explained that he hadn't purposely worked since 2022 and had no real intentions of going back, unless a truly special project came along. His reasoning was both simple and powerful. I had been working pretty hard for almost 60 years, he sighed, and I did not want to be one of those people who dropped dead on the set. The statement was a complete rejection of the career-first mindset that had defined his father and had cost him so much. He wasn't chasing roles anymore. He was chasing time. This new chapter is one of quiet seclusion and a deliberate step back from the Hollywood chaos. He and Catherine Zeta-Jones, whose marriage survived the immense stress of his illness and her own health battles, now spend much of their time at their home in Spain, living a more private life. Douglas has lovingly embraced a new role, joking, but he's happy to play the wife and watch Catherine continue her work. Reversal that says everything about his new priorities. This quieter life is also a second chance at fatherhood. With his younger children, Dylan and Carrie's, he's been the present, engaged father he admits he wasn't for Cameron. And in a story of hard-won redemption, he has rebuilt his relationship with Cameron, who was released from prison in 2016 and is now sober, an actor and a father himself. While the joy of this reunion is real, it's forever marked by the sadness of the lost years and the deep scars left by trauma. His life today isn't one of defeat, but of a conscious choice to withdraw. It's the life of a man who has looked into the abyss of family heartbreak and his own mortality and has chosen a different path. He's traded the frantic pace of film sets for the gentle rhythm of his improving golf game. He has stepped back from being a Hollywood icon to simply being a husband and a father. To some, this retreat might seem sad, the end of an era, the silencing of a powerful voice in cinema. But for Michael Douglas, it's the peaceful epilogue to a life story marked by just as much tragedy as triumph. It is the quiet harbor he has earned after navigating the most violent of storms. Michael Douglas's story is a true Hollywood saga, but not for the reasons you might think. He started as the son of a king, fighting to build his own empire. He reached the absolute top of his profession, winning the awards and achieving a level of fame very few ever know. But behind the spotlight was a man battling one devastating crisis after another. He fought the suffocating pressure of his father's legacy, the unimaginable heartbreak of watching his son's life spiral into addiction and prison, and a terrifying, life-threatening battle with cancer that brought him to the very edge. The quiet, semi-retired life he lives today isn't a simple choice. It's a direct result of that chaotic journey. It's a life shaped by deep loss, regret, and the hard-won wisdom that comes from surviving the unthinkable. The man who once had it all now seeks something far more valuable: peace. His story is a somber reminder that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows, and that behind the mask of even the greatest success can lie a story of deep and enduring sadness.